Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 3 of The Racer's Edge. We're in the lockdown still, and that's what this show is all about, kind of giving us all something to talk about, this sport that we love during this period, although we hope to continue it, obviously, as time goes on. Again, just got to give a big shout out to everybody who's working in the front line at this time. It's such a horrendous situation. Best wishes too to the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who appears to be making some positive forward steps now. So that's great news as well. Let's hope that continues. Best wishes to him and his family, and to everybody out there who's either hunkered down as we are, or indeed out there working for the services, the essential services. You're all heroes. And, this is it's just one of these really difficult, weird times, isn't it? So I got to begin by saying that breathing system that the Mercedes Formula One team helped to develop with some reverse engineering, I mentioned it last week, has now got pretty widespread take-up. It's available for all manufacturers to download now in terms of its design, and that's gathering pace, and that's a really, really good thing to hear. So congratulations to them and to the Formula One teams that have been involved in all of that as well. Moving on, I mentioned last week that we had the second E-Prix, the racing, online racing coming up in the to tally with, I think it was the Vietnamese Grand Prix, and it was on the Albert Park circuit, and we had Charles Leclerc, George Russell, Lando Norris. Well, I watched it, big deal, and it got a lot of coverage, didn't it? A lot of people seem to enjoy it. Charles Leclerc won it. No real surprise there, I guess. He is so mega, isn't he? But the one thing that I don't get, and I'm sure a lot of people will say, Peter, you're being a bit thick here, but I don't get why they are presenting it as almost as a virtual race. And that may sound odd, but it looks like a motor race. If my 98-year-old mum walked in and she saw it, she'd say, oh, Formula One's on TV again. It looked like a Formula One race. Whereas I expected to be able to see all these cool drivers sitting in their seats with the screen in front of them, looking at the driving position, looking at the footwell area, seeing what they're doing with the feet, seeing the steering inputs, look close up on the eyes. All the things we're never able to see in normal Formula One racing, but you can see because this is online. But there was none of that. We got audio interviews with Charles and a couple of other drivers, but that kind of, I was amazed by that, to be honest. I remember we had at the big Autosport International show a couple of years ago, we had a sim there, and we got quite a lot of drivers, rally drivers, F2 drivers in that sim to do a lap. And to me, it was kind of irrelevant what sort of time they were doing. The fascinating thing was to see the driving position they adopted, how they held the steering wheel, where the pressure points were on the steering wheel, what their footwork was like, what the expression was like on their face, because they're not wearing helmets or masks, how often they're blinking or not, all these things, the breathing, the heart rate, all that stuff that we never get access to should be, I think, the star attraction material of online racing. But that's just me, as they say, because I'm sure a lot of people think, oh, I want to see who's better, who's quicker, who's going to win. I want to see these guys as they're sitting. I'd love to have seen Charles Leclerc sitting in that sim and what his expression was like just before the start of that race. Obviously, it's only an online game, but I'd love to have seen that. I'd love to have seen how he looks when he's driving and how he's holding the wheel. To me, that is a missed opportunity, and I think we need to see that. That'll really bring it to life. Again, that's just my opinion, of course. So please, lots of questions if you like. Ask me, go to the YouTube channel link that we've given you there. I've got a question that came in actually from WhatsApp before the show started, so I'll begin with that. So our friend Diego Moreno, who's in Madrid, lives in Madrid, Mexican, lives in Madrid. So best wishes to you and all the folk in Madrid there. It's been a really, really tough time for you guys. But his question says, Peter, can you share your point of view regarding the new FIA rule change, which now allows drivers again to show up at each Grand Prix with a new helmet design? It's ironic, isn't it, that these days Sebastian Vettel has one of the most regular designs, conventional designs, considering that he was one of the first drivers constantly to change his helmet design in his Red Bull days. It's a pretty good question, isn't it? And I think It does beg the question of helmet designs these days and what it's all about and what they're trying to achieve with it. And without wanting to be too cynical, I guess one of the things is to change it as much as possible so that if you've already bought this helmet in this color, you're not going to go and buy another one. We all know about that. But putting that to one side, you know what? It doesn't worry me that much because you can't really see the helmets anymore because of the halos. In the days, but pre-halo days, I think it was much more of an issue. Now, I mean, I have no idea really. If you ask me the intricate details of, I don't know, Checo Perez's helmet, I wouldn't really have much idea. It probably reflects my lack of attention to detail, I suppose, in that area. But partly it reflects the halo. And even when we're in the garage, you can't get a great view of the helmet anymore. And so I have to say, I'm a bit blasé about it, but I say, well, kind of, so what? I'm looking down because I'm just getting down to my to the YouTube page now because I've got to log into that to log into it. I've got to find the correct page in order to get the other questions. But thanks, Diego, for that question. It was a good one. And I suppose Sebastian Vettel does deserve plaudits, I think, for that rather classic helmet design that he has. It's pretty good, isn't it? Slightly off center, that line, which is slightly unsettling. But in general, I like that retro look very much, only because it's simple and it works. And it did for so many drivers over the years. I mean, John Surtees' white helmet with the light blue was just tape ready, and then it became paint just that way. Wonderful. Jim Clark, dark blue with a white peak most of the time, but sometimes with no peak at all. Border Reivers colors. Graham Hill, London Rowing Club, Dan Gurney, dark blue. And so it went on. Lorenzo Bandini was very simple but effective too. You know, it's a shame, I think, that we've gone to these intricate colors, but it's part of the Formula One thing. And as I say now, allowing them to change every race, well, it's just going to allow everybody to make a bit more money, isn't it? Right. Barry Cosgrove says, hello from Victoria, Canada. Hi, Barry. Nice to say hello to you. Yeah, very good. Formula One has helped so much with the ventilators. Oh, that was from the KO Cup. Barry, we're just saying hi, I got to say. How do you think the Formula One, this is from Sjod de Groot. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Sjod. How do you think the Formula One challenge translate to eFormula One? Where does it compare and where does it lack? Great vid, thanks. Well, I've kind of addressed that already. You know, to me, online racing, I'm just pausing to have a sip here from my Raffles Hotel Singapore Cup, which I bought, of course, in Singapore one year. Raffles Hotel, wonderful place. I think, you know, the sim to me is not what it's all about because the reasons I've gone into, the lack of feel for all the dynamic weights involved in managing a Grand Prix car. You're balancing. It's like a billiard table with the balls on it. They start off in the center in the triangle. You take the triangle away. And then if you had two people at either end trying to move the table so that none of the balls went in any of the pockets, that's what managing the dynamic weight of a Grand Prix car or of any racing car is all about. And that's what a sim will never do. It's hand-eye coordination, it's precision, it's accuracy. It's all the things that, it's the other things that racing drivers have. And we saw the difference there between Leclerc and, say, I don't know, Ben Stokes, who doesn't have the same precision on throttle and brakes. Ben Stokes being a very, very good cricketer, but not somebody who spent a lot of time, I guess, driving very quick cars very quickly. And that's the difference. But it isn't nonetheless what it's ultimately all about. It's not what differentiates between a Lewis Hamilton and an average racing driver or a Charles Leclerc and an average racing driver, because it's that ultimate ability to be able to finesse all those dynamic weights in such a way that it doesn't upset the car. That is what great Grand Prix driving is all about. And so, yeah, that's my response to that one. Peter, I have a simple question. What's your favorite track? This is from Sander K. Thanks for that one. Favorite track? It's a very good question, Sander, because it engenders a lot of thought. Does it mean from the perspective of a journalist like me going to races and getting a great vantage point and finding a corner where it's wonderful to watch? Or do we mean the circuit which always makes the eyes stand out on stalks for racing drivers and the veins pop on the forehead? You know, I really used to love the original Long Beach I thought it was a great circuit because A, it was a street circuit, so it was bumpy and lots of things going on. There were some tight corners with elevation changes in the middle, which were brilliant. And there were some quick corners there too. And it really, and there were lots of walls to hit. So, and it was a great Grand Prix in the sense that it was California and everybody was delighted to be there, and you got there early and you stayed on a bit later on afterwards. It was just a great Grand Prix circuit, and it's a shame it got shortened and then it got changed, and the one they use today for IndyCar is nothing like the same track. So I missed that a lot. I grew up in Sydney, Australia, with the Warwick Farm circuit. Probably nobody around now today has ever heard of that, but it was a great circuit as well. We had no fatalities at any race meeting from 1958 to about 74, I think, when it closed. It was designed by Jeffrey Sykes, who was basically my mentor in motor racing. He was the secretary of the Australian Automobile Racing Club, and it was modeled on Aintree Circuit in England, which is the horse race track and motor racing circuit. And twice, of course, the motor racing track has to go over the horse racing track, and they lay down tarmac bricks or covers at that point. And we did the same thing at Warwick Farm. It was a lovely circuit. I remember all the Grand Prix drivers that used to come out used to say how much they enjoyed racing at Warwick Farm. And for me, that was a great combination of fast corners, slow corners, grass, picket fencing, very good spectator viewing points, access, everything was great. Love that. The old Nürburgring, Tony Trimmer's been putting out some great pictures this week on his Facebook page. Very good driver, Tony, of course, of the 75 German Grand Prix when he drove the Mackie in practice qualifying. Didn't actually qualify it because the car was horrendously dangerous. And eventually the rear suspension broke as he went up into the carousel. And I was actually watching at the carousel that day with Denny Hulme, it was in his first year of retirement. He was president of the GPDA. And Tony sort of came in sideways, had a massive lose, and came to rest on the inside of the carousel. So and those were the pictures that went out on Facebook. But those Nürburgring days, going out, deciding where you want to get out of the car, where you're going out with photographers. I'm going to go this corner, Wipperman, Flansgarten, Carousel, Adenau, wherever it was. I mean, it was hard to beat the Nürburgring, actually. I mean, I'm mentioning places that nobody can ever get to. Right now, I love Suzuka. I'm very sorry to see Sepang off the championship, because that was a great circuit as well. And funnily enough, I like Turkey a lot as well. It was very difficult for getting around, but it was a very, very good Grand Prix circuit, I think. Lots of great variety of corners too. Of today's tracks, actually on the calendar now, I love going to Canada. I just wish the circuit was, I don't know what really. It's a little bit, no, I don't wish anything. I think it's a great circuit now, if I think about it. It's got the quick corners out the back. It's got the long straight. It's got the braking area into the chicane before the pits. And it's got that great turn one with the immediate braking into turn two, which is very, very difficult and very demanding. And that's an area where this finesse-y thing comes into play. So I'd have to put Canada in there. I love going to Canada. Hungary's a nice circuit too. For watching, it's a bit annoying in terms of everything else, the slow corners, but it's in terms of watching the racing and having a good weekend, Budapest, not bad at all. Anyway, there we go, rambled on a bit there. Let's have a look. So I hope that was all right. This is from Mr. Dieselakias. Hope that's correct pronunciation as well. When do you think the isolation measures will ease off? Well, I was talking to my buddy Alan Gow yesterday. He runs the British Touring Car Championship, and there aren't many race promoters better than Alan Gow. And I said, what are you planning at the moment, Alan, in terms of the BTCC? And he said, oh, we're thinking of probably August with closed gates, no spectators in August. So that's what he thinks. I mean, it's an interesting one. It's not an interesting one. It's a frustrating one. Today in England, they announced that Royal Ascot, the big horse racing event, was going to be going ahead in July, again, with closed doors, no spectators. And they interviewed one of the horse trainers, and he was saying, from the point of view of our industry, it's really important that we have Royal Ascot. And we can get around the 2-meter social thing reasonably well, and we're pretty confident we can put on this event, and it'll be a huge thing globally on television. At which point my ears pricked up, of course, because Formula One is global television, isn't it? The problem with Formula One, of course, is that in order to exist, we need a a lot of money coming into the sport, mainly from television and from the circuit appearance fees from all those countries that have Grand Prix. They pay Formula One upwards of 35, 40 million pounds or euros per race. And if you said, okay, let's put the British Grand Prix on, but closed doors, no spectators, putting aside another issue, which I'll raise in a minute, but if you said that, there would be a huge problem, because the only money that the circuit promoter can effectively earn is from the spectators coming in, because everything else goes to the Formula One package. So from Silverstone's point of view, they would lose even more money than normal, actually, if that happened, if the British Grand Prix was held amongst closed doors. Unless, of course, it was underwritten in some other way, which I doubt would be the case. So you could imagine right now that probably behind closed doors at Silverstone, they're probably saying, we're not putting the British Grand Prix on this year. We're not going to lose a fortune. So that's one way of looking at it. The other point I was going to make was that, of course, unlike Royal Ascot with the horses and the trainers and the jockeys, Formula One, it's much, much more difficult to control the social distancing, the 2-meter rule, or indeed 4 meters, as I think it is in some parts of America now, California, I think. But so let's call it 2 meters. You know, how are you going to do that in a crowded garage, in a pit lane, whatever, marshalling? Even if you have no spectators, very, very difficult to do that. So I think it's going to be, you know, you got Alan Gow saying August. It looks as if it could be, if things go well as we hope, it could be Monza, Singapore time. As I said in the last show, imagine if it was Italy, you know, after everything they've been through with the virus situation, if the first race was at Monza in Italy. In some ways, Monza, Italy, it would be a great thing to do. In other ways, a huge, huge ask. And then Singapore, of course, if Singapore are going to be part of the calendar and are going to put on their race, it isn't just a question of turning up and racing. They need to prepare that circuit well in advance, probably so far in advance that it'll be a time when they're not sure if they've got the race on anyway. So that's another complication that comes from Singapore. So in answer to your question, I don't know. All I can do is keep my head down, as everybody else is, I think, and just hope that, you know, it gets back to normal as soon as is safe. That's the only thing we're asking. I mentioned that Lewis Hamilton was not as cool and humble as he used to be. This is from S. Salibi. Perhaps championship number 6 has got to him. Did I say that? If I did, I kind of take it back, because I haven't spent enough time with him to say that, actually. What I said was, I think, what I tried to say was that I got the impression that he was not the earthy racing driver that I know, and I'll use the word love as well, over the winter. Maybe this long break has brought him right back to earth again. I think, you know, championship number 6, global superstar, all those things inevitably must play some role in the way he thinks and the way he gets up in the morning and wonders what he's going to do next over the winter. And I guess it was that I was saying, but I don't know, that's about it. I don't think with this long break, I think Lewis now will come back absolutely flat out, the normal Lewis Hamilton that we know. And I don't think there'll be any change at all in the way he operates from previous championship winning years. I think he's right back there. It was just something I noted over the winter, really. Denny, hi, Peter. Question, which IndyCar driver has the potential to drive Formula One and be very good? And he's got Newgarden. Well, Joseph Newgarden, definitely. A long time ago now, I was endeavoring to do a Formula One team in America. And the goal always was to have at least one American driver in the car. And so I got Joseph Newgarden over to the UK with a couple of others as well. Alexander Rossi was another. Gabby Chavez, the third, to do some days with Rob Wilson, just so we can get a feel for them. And Joseph was always a guy that really, really wanted to work with. He was still in, I think he was in Indy Lights at that point. I think he was, yeah, I don't think he was in IndyCar even. And really rated him then. Very, very impressive guy, very intelligent, very nice guy. And yeah, I think he could have made it. You know, I've said many times actually, but I'll repeat it now, that I think that had Jeff Gordon or Tony Stewart been given a proper F1 opportunity at the right stage of their career, both of them could have become Grand Prix winners with the right team. Okay, so you could argue, well, that's not saying very much, but it is actually, because Formula One just turned their back on both those guys basically and never really gave them any sort of opportunity. The problem always is that a Formula One team wants to see drivers coming up from karting, Formula Renault, Formula 3, Formula 2, Formula 1, perfect. Well, all the sort of Max Verstappen, let's jump, Formula 2. And American drivers tend to want to do college and then go into a pro career as a driver. So the whole timing thing is out of sync. So when I say a Formula One team needed to give these drivers a real opportunity, what I meant by that was, if a McLaren or a Williams or a Ferrari had said to Tony Stewart or Jeff Gordon quite early on in their careers, come over, we will finance a full Formula 2 season, you'll be doing Formula 1 testing, you'll be doing sim work, you'll be doing all the things with the Grand Prix team, we want you to do Formula 2 for a year, fully financed, and then we want you to do 3 years guaranteed in Formula 1. Either of those two guys would have done it, and either of them would have been really successful. But of course, no Formula One team ever did that. When I was at Williams, I pushed really hard to try to get Frank to do a deal with Jeff Gordon. Bernie did too. But in the end, it was just too big an ask to get him to commit to that sort of program. And from Jeff's point of view, it wasn't worth giving up everything that he had in order to come over and maybe see if he could get a Grand Prix drive if he was a Williams test driver or something like that. Why would he do that? And so they've never had these opportunities. And I think it's incredible that Rossi hasn't had an opportunity to do Formula One correctly. Incredible that Joseph Newgarden has either. And then speaking of IndyCar drivers, you know, guys like Felix Rosenqvist, well, I'm on record as saying how ridiculous it is that Felix hasn't had a proper offer as well. So that's, you know, that's just totally beyond me. So it all comes down to the teams don't really reward a lot of talent these days. Bland statement. There you go. Alex Lamas says, sorry, Bronco Billy. Oh, no, there's another one here. Denny, can you tell us about your perspective about the European Grand Prix 1997? In what respect there? You need to come back and ask me a bit more specific question there. Are we talking about the fact that you can hold a race in a country without it being that country's race? That's something that I've been really pushing for. And I was interested to see that Stuart Pringle of the BRDC, very closely connected with the British Grand Prix, said last week, at Silverstone, we'd be quite happy to put on 5 Formula One races. So there's the first person actually to agree with me, I think, in what I was saying in that video I did out in Melbourne after the race was postponed, where I said I thought we should have a bunch of races in Silverstone, a bunch of races at Ricard, a bunch of races in Austin, and maybe a bunch of races at, I don't know, Sepang, hopefully, or maybe Suzuka. And that should be the championship. Cut down on this huge carbon footprint we have, cut down on all the traveling, reduce the cost, do those 5 races, everybody in situ. And Stuart Pringles has taken it up and said, yeah, I think, you know, bring it on. Silverstone would do that. Anyway, yeah, I don't think it's a problem to do that. Bronco Billy, Peter, Vietnam looks like it'll produce good racing. Would you agree? I don't know. It's very, what do you mean by good racing? I think it'll be, there are some overtaking places. There could be some corners which are good. But none of it is really satisfactory, is it? The cars are too big, too heavy, too wide, too long. That's the biggest problem. And the circuits, particularly street circuits, are inevitably going to be too tight and too small, narrow. Yeah, I think Vietnam looked to be a pretty good layout. So it's interesting that, you know, everybody's trying hard. It's not the real solution, I don't think, but yeah, what can I say? Alex Lamas says, where in Canada is best to watch? Well, I always love watching coming out of the turn 2. Well, I love watching coming into turn 2. So if I can get a head-on view as they're doing the change of direction from turn 1, which is the left-hander, what I would call turn 1, maybe a kink there's turn 1, I don't know. But the long left-hander at the end of the pit straight, I would call turn 1. And then they're braking with the car's load on it and they're getting into the tight right. I love that bit, just watching that change of direction and how everybody does that. So that's 2, 3... on the assumption that the next chicane is turns 3 and 4, I love watching out of 4, 5, 6. There's some really quick corners there, particularly early in the weekend when there's not a lot of grip. And then it's quite good just going with the fans down to the hairpin at the end of the long straight, just to enjoy the mood there. I like hairpins and long straights, breaking into hairpins. It's part of racing, and every circuit needs them. And it's a great hairpin at Montreal, isn't it? You can take different lines there and not lose a lot of time, and you can pass into there, and it's it's a nice place. Okay, we'll do one more question, and then I've got the first of our treats. Ryan International, Formula One broadcasting classic races. Peter, do you ever look back on any of those classic races? What feelings stir in you when you do, specifically Williams races? Yeah, I do. Periodically, I must say, I've got, I'm a bit weird because I've got all my own memories of all those races and all those weekends and everything that happened. And so when I'm watching them now, sort of distantly, it doesn't really seem like the same place that I know in my head from my perspective. And so I tend not to do too much of that watching, or indeed reading books, motor racing books, because I want to keep all my own thoughts and memories fresh, which I do sometimes, of course, not always that fresh. But yeah, I mean, I was talking to a friend this morning in Australia, Oscar de Vries, who used to be publisher of F1 Racing magazine out there, actually, and he was lamenting the loss of spectacular Formula One cars that were typical of the 80s and the late 70s, 80s. He said, for him, that was Formula One, and he loves watching those races much more than he does watching the current stuff. But anyway, that's getting down the road of the good old days, which isn't what it's all about. Bitcoin Allen is the name. You think Max Verstappen has a better chance to become world champion if the championship has less races? ? Absolutely. I've said that. I've said that because I've said that a couple of times now. I don't know why. Part of it's gut feeling. Part of it is Max is a real opportunist, isn't he? And I think there's so few chances for things to go wrong if it's a small championship, short championship. And I think Max has matured massively over the last 12 months. He's really, really good at finishing races now. Not that Lewis isn't, but I think it'll be such a different thing for Lewis and Mercedes that it could be slightly discombobulating. Do we just try and win every race? Do we try and be reliable, stay out of trouble, so few races? But I think Max will just get that clean idea of what needs to be done. And I think he has a really good chance, actually. Barry Cosgrove, absolutely right. Robert Wickens did not get a chance. Robert is another of my heroes. We use Skype for this and for this show. And when I logged on this morning just to do a small test, about the fourth person I'd rung on Skype was Robert Wickens years ago now, obviously a couple of years ago. It was just after the accident, just to wish him all the best. What a talent. And I've said it a couple of times. To me, he was definitely able to win Grand Prix. He was never given a chance either. He was given a bit of a chance by Manor, but it didn't materialize into anything solid. But he should have been given a real opportunity with, I don't know, Red Bull, anybody. Robert Wickens, what an outstanding driver. And sadly missed from the Grand Prix circuits, but we wish him all the best. Really, really good go. I guess this is how a race. I guess you're from Portugal, How. It says Formula One at Portimao would be mind-blowing. Well, it would. Yeah, bring it on. We can all think of circuits which would work within this low carbon footprint plan that we're putting together. We're hatching here on the show. Emmanuel Boating, which MotoGP rider would like? I think you mean would I like to see tackle Formula One at some point in the future? Well, it has to be Marquez, doesn't it? Just love to know how all that translates into driving a Grand Prix car. He's probably brilliant, I would imagine. Mike Hailwood, Giacomo Agostini didn't have a great transition. Obviously, John Surtees, Damon Hill. You can do it, definitely. And I think Marquez would be impressive, wouldn't he? Your thoughts on Toto Wolff beyond this year? Christian Toto Wolff. I think he's an amazing guy, isn't he? He's a bit, I just don't know. When Nico Rosberg was racing, I always used to think this guy's going to end up being, I don't know, Chancellor of Germany. He's multilingual, he's intelligent, he's knowledgeable, he's much too impressive just to be a Formula One driver. And he's done a really good job since he retired, particularly on the whole ecosystem and sustainability and everything he's doing there. Excellent. But he hasn't become, I thought he could have been a global philanthropist politician, but he's not. So I don't know it's hard to know what Toto would do beyond Formula One. You know, he'd be a great FIA president, wouldn't he? He would be a very good leader of liberty, wouldn't he? You know, he's very, very good at managing people, getting the best from people, and seeing the correct route to take when there's a lot of stuff around to cause confusion. He's got a great brain. I love spending time with Toto, and you know, I just hope that if and when Mercedes do pull out, that we do see him in some amazing role. Preferably FIA president, I would guess, would be the best thing, wouldn't it? Whether he'd want to do that or not, it's very political. I don't know. Horatio 156 says, "Hi Peter, how important do you think age is nowadays for a Grand Prix driver? Considering most of the new drivers are so young, do you think this is a pattern that will continue in the next few years?" Excuse me for a sec. It's a good question, isn't it? I don't think age is as important as it was, to be honest. I think there was a time when if you weren't 17, 18, 19, you were too old to be on the cusp of Formula One and you got discarded. I'm not sure that's the case anymore. I don't know why. Maybe social trends or social manners mean that we now have to consider everybody with a little bit more respect, and that some drivers don't have the luxury of starting when they were 7 years old. And we should, maybe it's my imagination, but I do think that I think we're slightly less worried about age than we used to be. Maybe my imagination, but I hope it's the case, because I think it's ridiculous that we don't allow drivers to leave international racing to go to IndyCar and then come back again. Rosenquist being a very good example. You know, he should be in a couple of years. I'd love to see him I'd love to see him in Formula One. Rallycross Craig, sorry. Peter, what memories stick out from you when Formula One cars were last at Brands Hatch? I've been watching some great old clips on YouTube from 83, 86 at Brands, and it looked and sounded brilliant. Thank you. Notice I changed the word fantastic to brilliant there, Rallycross Craig. It's only because I got a massive dressing down from Mike Dudson a couple of years ago for using the word fantastic to mean great, when it doesn't mean that. It means something from fantasy, and it's a misuse of the word. So from now on, I said to myself 2 years ago, I will never misuse fantastic. I will use other words. And I said, well, give me a good example, Mike, of what you really mean. He said, if you take the Battle of the Coral Sea, or no, the Battle of Midway, when the Japanese were claiming the number of destroyers and aircraft carriers they'd knocked out, they were fantastic claims because they were from the realms of fantasy. That is what fantastic means. It's misused today, of course. Anyway, going back to Brands Hatch 86, pre-86. 86, of course, is the year that Nigel and Keke had that amazing race. Sorry, Nigel and Nelson had an amazing race. And I was very, very nervous at that point, wondering, when and where they were going to have their shunt together. It was also the race in which Frank made his first appearance after the accident. So that race meant a lot to me. We were sponsored by Mobil, and we won the Shell Oils British Grand Prix, which we actually got a T-shirt to that effect, which was nice. So that was a great day. 85 European Grand Prix, another brilliant day for me, because I'd grown up with Nigel, really, and we were kind of like brothers, and to see him win his first Grand Prix there at Brands, couldn't be a better circuit on which to have done it. And he did it in style. He did it beautifully, and he drove beautifully that day. Keke was quick too, but Nigel was superb. 78 British Grand Prix was one of my greatest moments in my life, I think, when Carlos won that race. Bruno Giacomelli coming out of clearways, Nicky slightly unsure of which side to go, and Carlos just dived down the inside and got the lead going into Paddock Bend. Particularly as Carlos had been under a lot of flack from Ferrari going into that race, and how he should be replaced, and he wasn't capable of being a number one. Carlos was brilliantly quick. He maybe wasn't the greatest racing driver in the world, but that was an example of how good Carlos could be in a race situation. And and I'd spent all weekend with Carlos, actually, because he was staying in a hotel near me in London, and we drove down to Brands together every day. And that was just a perfect weekend. We had dinner that night in a little restaurant in near Harrods, near his hotel. And I remember we just had sort of Wiener Schnitzel and glass of wine, I think. Very quiet, but yeah. But he always had a bit of a thing about the trophy, because he loved the British Grand Prix trophy. And he was on to me for months afterwards, Neil Easton Gibson, to get what he would call the Challenger trophy, which was his word for the replica of the real thing, because you had to keep handing back the Challenger was actually the one you had to keep handing back, that's right, which lived at the RAC and still does. But he wanted the replica of it, and he was annoyed that the replicas that were done were like 20th scale replicas. So I spent the back half of that year trying to get a proper replica made for Carlos. So yeah, a lot of memories. Emerson winning there 72, everything was perfect for me, not for me, for everyone, I think. The black and gold 72, Colin Chapman, the way the car looked on the road, just superb. Couldn't be a better circuit in which to show the shape and the essence of that whole JPS Lotus 72 era. Gilles winning there in the Race of Champions, which was excellent. Love that. I don't know, goes on and on, doesn't it? I think that's probably enough for that one. But yeah, great circuit. I really miss Brands. Thanks for asking that one, because so many great corners. It was just a circuit which just brought the best out in the great drivers, I think. So, wow, I've got so many questions. Thank you, everybody, for asking all these questions. Amazing. Paul Corley, Peter, which Formula One drivers will be negatively affected career-wise by this long delay? Well, I said in a couple of videos ago, or maybe last week, that I thought it was a question of press pause and then press play, isn't it? Isn't everything frozen? Nobody's going to make any judgments. I suppose it's going to be more in the categories below Formula One, where teams are really struggling financially. And in order to keep going, they've got to go to drivers who do bring a lot of money to the teams. We don't know yet what it's going to be like for the Formula One teams financially, but I don't think the drivers themselves will suffer because of this, because they'll be keeping fit in their own environments. They'll be doing their thing on the sim, I guess, or some other ways. And most of them probably will benefit from being able to take a little bit of a step back and thinking about driving, where they're going, mistakes they've made, all the things you never really get a chance to do very well. You can kind of do it over the winter break, but there's so many other things going on with the team usually that they don't get this opportunity to press pause. So I think actually most of them, probably all of them, will benefit from this in a way. I don't think anyone will be hurt from it anyway. As a driver, that is. Denny, again, I was thinking about Jacques versus Michael. Sorry, yeah, okay, you're thinking about Jacques versus Michael in that race. In Jerez, that aspect of it. I think, well, we know that Michael, was just a victim of his own Michael Schumacherisms, which we later saw when he, brought practice qualifying to a halt at Monaco. Michael just couldn't handle not winning, really, could he? He wasn't very good at not winning. That was, I guess, his biggest minus point. But I don't know. I was, and I still am, a massive Michael Schumacher fan. So I was, although I knew Gilles very well and I like Jacques, I did feel kind of sad that day, I think. Yeah, I did, definitely. I remember I was there with Johnny Williams. We went to the party after the race, and I couldn't really get into it because I was kind of worried about the Michael Ferrari repercussions. Anyway, there you go. M.A. Smith, I think I'm going to like this question. Like you, I think Jim Clark is the best driver ever. What's your thoughts on the 66 Indy 500? Do you think the timekeepers missed a lap and Graham Hill got the win? Well, I could talk for hours. I'm going to try and be really quick here, but there were some T-shirts out at the time, weren't they, about a week later, saying I saw Jim Clark win the 66 Indy 500. For those of those who don't know, Jimmy appeared to win the race, but later the timekeepers thought that Jimmy had lost a lap when he had a big spin, but we'll get on it in a minute. They thought he lost a lap, and therefore the win went to Graham Hill. And Jimmy, classic Jim Clark, even though there was all that doubt, was the first to say, literally the first to say, congratulations, Graham, you deserve the win, shook his hand and joined in the festivities for Graham winning the 66 Indy 500. But here's the punchline. Not so long ago, my dear friend Nigel Roebuck was at Indy, and he was either in a coffee shop or he was in the Indy, the wonderful Donald Davidson Indy library, one of the two. I think it was a coffee shop. And he was talking to somebody like Donald Davidson of Indianapolis, or maybe, it could have been a Gordon Kirby. They were talking about Indy 66. And there were two elderly senior gentlemen at the next table, or very near. And one of them said, we've been listening to what you've been talking about. We were both timekeepers at Indy in 66. And we can tell you now that Jim Clark won that race. We discovered it about a week later, but it was too late to do anything. We kept it under wraps, but Jim Clark definitely won the 66 Indy 500. That was what Nigel had from just these two guys. Now, Javi Krombach, having said all that, Javi Krombach, who was at the Indy 500, as he was at all the Indy 500s, big friend of Jimmy, big friend of Colin Chapman. Whenever I spoke to Javi about this, he always said, no, absolutely for sure, Graham Hill won that race. And if anybody was going to promote a Jim Clark win in 66, it would be Javi Krombach. So make of that what you will. I accept the fact that Jimmy acclaimed Graham as the Indy 500 winner. And to me, that was enough. Even if Jimmy knew inside that he'd won it, he gave the win to Graham. So you give a present away, you don't take it back again, do you? And that was the way Jimmy Clark was. Okay, moving on to the next one. Gonzalo Maurizio Martins. Do you think Alonso is a top 10 driver of all time? Wow, difficult question, that one. I'm not sure that I do, to be honest. I think, I don't know, maybe I do. I mean, he's a great racing driver, isn't he? He's so good at driving race cars on a Sunday, as Mark Webber said so many times. And he's so good at driving cars that are not very good or have bits fallen off them. I think of Daniel Ricciardo's restart pass on Alonso at the US Grand Prix, I don't know, whenever it was, when Fernando was at Ferrari, and he just got him going into those quick corners. It's just a perfect pass. There have been occasions when Fernando's done things and you wonder, is he a great driver with those sorts of things he's done, whether it be the internal things in the garage. I was talking to Felipe Massa not so long ago, and he said, when Alonso was at Ferrari, it was a completely different Ferrari. Felipe, lost all his feel for the team. It wasn't the Ferrari that he knew. And he just said, Fernando, you can't criticize him for it in a way because he's just out for himself. I just mentioned my friend Nigel Roebuck. If I say Alonso isn't one of the top 10 drivers of the world, Nigel will probably never speak to me again, and nor probably will Tony Brooks, who also really rates Fernando, as does Richard Atwood and a lot of other people out there as well. So I guess I'm going to have to say yes. I'll just cop out there and say yeah, for sure, one of the best. Nuvolari, the Nuvolari of Spain. So just having to reboot my live chat thing here. Actually, while I'm doing that, one other thing I'll do now is introduce the second video, which is, I'll give you the story here. I rang Beaky Sims, Dave Sims, who is a very good friend of mine, lovely guy. I rang him on April the 7th, which was the day of memory of Jimmy's passing at Hockenheim, because Beaky was the mechanic on Jimmy's car that day. Horrendously traumatic day for him, as you can imagine. And he just said, there isn't an April the 7th that goes by when he just doesn't feel very depressed all day. So I rang him and we chatted away, and we started to talk about racing things as we do. And I said, well, you at 67, what were you doing, Beaky, as a matter of interest? Bearing in mind, Jimmy was driving the Lotus 48 Formula 2 car in 67. And that was the car, of course, in which he had his accident in 68. And he said, oh, no, I wasn't on Jimmy's car, but I was doing Formula 2 on Jack Oliver's Lotus Components Lotus 41C, which was a bit of a weird car. It was a space frame Formula 3 car with a Cosworth FVA 1600 Formula 2 engine in the back. And that was the car Beaky was on. And Bob Sparshott, I think, was on Graham Hill's 48. And I think Alan McCall was on Jimmy's Lotus 48 when they were green and yellow in 67. So we started talking about that. And then he said, oh, God, 67. He said, it's the biggest problem for me. I'm kind of kind of simulating the way Beaky Sims talks. He said, I'll never forget Reims 67 because, what these, Bob Dance, I think it was, led us all into this. We were staying in the town and they had these aluminium, telegraph poles and lamp posts and everything else. And, somebody said, I wonder if they bend when you get to the top of them. So, of course, we all started to climb up these aluminium posts to see, and one of them did bend. He said, anyway, no. The gendarmerie came along and arrested 4 Lotus mechanics and took them down to the local clink. And there they hung out for a bit. This is Saturday night before the Formula 2 race at Rouen 67, the mid-July, the weekend before the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. And sure enough, eventually, I think it was one of the officials came along and said, look, these guys are all from England. Sorry, they've caused all this trouble. Motor racing mechanics work for Team Lotus. And Bob Dance and the 2 others said, yeah, brilliant. Okay. And then Beaky got up to leave the cell and they said, oh, hang on a sec. This guy's not with us. We don't know this guy at all. And so they just locked the cell again, leaving Beaky there on his own. For I don't know how long, but eventually, a couple of hours later, I guess, Jim Clark turned up and said, Beaky, what you've been doing? And, he got him out of prison. And so Beaky said, that's the sort of guy Jimmy was. He thought it was very funny, but equally, he did actually feel quite sorry for Beaky, even though he wasn't on Jimmy's car at the time. Anyway, so it made me think, APArchives, here we are. We've got this amazing situation with AP. I wonder if there's any footage of that 67 Formula 2 race at Rouen. And before we get to it, just let me introduce it. There was, again, it's pretty short, it's black and white, but it is the Formula 2 race Rouen 67. And it's interesting for another reason. And that is because I interviewed Jack Brabham once when he was in England at the site, actually, of his Esso garage in Hook Road in Chessington, which was a jet garage by then, but he still had an office in the back. And we were chatting away. I did this interview and I was talking to him about Jimmy, actually. And I said, do you think it was a puncture? And he said, oh, yeah, it was a puncture at Hockenheim. But of course, the problem was Jimmy would always drive through problems. They used to say that about Jochen Rindt as well. Always drive through problems until he had to bring the car in. And he said a good example of that was the 67 Formula 2 race at Rouen when he had a big battle with Jimmy. Jack was in the... He was in a Brabham Cosworth FVA at that point, having won a lot of races with the Honda in 66, but they went to the FVA in 67. So it was the Brabham, Jack Brabham in the Brabham, and it was Jim Clark in the Lotus 48, having a big dice at Rouen, very, very dangerous, fast circuit with one hairpin, wheel-to-wheel stuff. Jackie Stewart's in there with the Tyrrell Matra, Jochen Rindt with the Winkelmann Brabham. And Jack said he was behind Jimmy, and he could see one of the rear tires starting to go down on Jimmy's 48. And he said, I was trying to get alongside him into the braking area, into the hairpin, to wave to him, to show him that there was something going on. And he said Jimmy did 2 laps with that tire starting to deflate and then had an enormous lose. And Jack hit him and they both crashed. Both okay, but it was a quick part of the circuit. And it shows in another perspective, doesn't it? We talk about Hockenheim in 68 and the unimportant race, but I mean, Jimmy had a lot of incidents in Formula 2 because it was so close and they were racing quite a lot on these dodgy circuits. So Miss M.A. Smith said, thanks for your thoughts on Jimmy's 66 Indy win. No, it's an Indy race. Interesting. Thanks so much. What circuit is this? Rouen. Well, there you are. Hockenheim? No, not. I don't know who thought it was Hockenheim. So let me just go back to the live chat. I think we're kind of done there. A few more points I just want to make that we've had this year about the Formula One calendar. We've had an official announcement from the Canadians that the Canadian Grand Prix has been cancelled, which is a great shame. I said back in middle of March, that it would be great if we could start this championship at the Canadian Grand Prix, but that's not going to happen. We've already talked about the feasibility of starting it at Silverstone. Personally, I don't see that happening. But nonetheless, a sad press release from the Canadians in which they said they'd looked at every possible avenue to try and have that race, but it's not going to happen. So yeah, it's a difficult time, isn't it? And I just think that we all have to be. Actually, it's a lot more questions here. I was just about to go into a rambling stage, but I'm not very good at this because I've gone to the bottom and they're questions that I've answered. Video definitely works. That's from Frank Powell. Do more. Well, thank you very much, Frank. Brian says, what happened to our new and Ferrari after the 85 Brazilian Grand Prix? Yeah, some things about Rennie's career which should remain private, I think. All I can say, I really like Rennie. I know he's a really good bloke, and particularly now. But yeah, he had some things going on, which here we go. Thank you, Peter. This is Alex Lamas. Before my time, but I'm a massive Jim Clark fan. Alex Lamas, Pathé Films. Yeah, you can watch all Pathé. You can watch all those, other ones. But actually to put them out them on YouTube, that's a different story. You can watch them, but what we're doing is putting this out. So again, a really big thanks to AP for that one. Demiscu. Hi, Peter. Last time I asked about the feeder series, Denny asked about IndyCar too. So my question, has any driver a chance of Formula One outside of DTM Super Formula? If yes, who? I was interested to see, speaking of Super Formula, that Yuri Vips is doing Super Formula this year. I really rate Yuri and hope that he does well out there. I think he will. He's trying for Mugen, I think. So yeah, I think Super Formula is a great category in which to be taking part. I did actually mention some of the drivers in F3 and F2 in the show last week, and it was so many guys, good guys. I was looking at the F2 lineup. I've just got it here. I mean, there's so many guys that could win that championship. Dan Ticktum, obviously, with family money, is buying his way back into the sport, having blown it with Red Bull, but he's driving for Dams, and he should go very quickly in the Dams. For sure, he's going to win some races, I would say. Guanyu Zhou needs to build on a brilliant season. He will. A lot of guys who this will be a make and break year for them, assuming it happens this year, if not next year. Guanyu is probably one of them. Callum Eilert's another. And be really interesting to see how Christian Lundgaard goes. Well, he was in that. He was in the online race, wasn't he? He's very, very quick. Christian, very, very good. Really rate him. Jehan Darubala, another guy that looked really good last year in F2. How's he going to go? He's obviously really good as well. Indian, a brilliant driver. Luis Delatraz has had some great races. He needs to really consolidate this year and hopefully get a proper drive out of it. And Pedro Piquet, I really rate Pedro Piquet, actually. He's switched from Trident to Charouz. So that, again, I keep saying interesting, but what other word can you say? It's going to be so close amongst these guys. And Felipe Drugovich didn't have a great year last year, but wasn't he good in 2018? So he's another guy to watch. Artem, we've mentioned, who's now driving for Arden. And then I didn't mention Mick Schumacher, who I also rate. And he's got Robert Schwartzman alongside him. That's going to be a really interesting comparison at Prema, isn't it? Because Robert's really quick. Mick is very quick and intelligent. So how those two match up will be fascinating. I'll use a different word now. Marino Sato's shown his pace as well. And then, of course, we have High Tech coming into Formula 2, which will be fabulous to watch. Really big fan of Ollie Oakes. And Nikita Mazepin and Luca Giotto. What a great pair of drivers they are. So Formula 2, what an amazing grid. And Formula 3, I didn't mention Richard Vasseur and his win at Macau and whether he can build on that. Jack Doohan, he's really good. And we got David Schumacher, who's Ralph's son, and obviously Mick in Formula 2. So we've got two Schumachers now. Inam Ahmed, Cameron Das, both driving for Carlin, and they drove together, I think, for Carlin in British Formula 3. And Cameron was beaten by Inam, but he's driven really well, and I actually rate him very highly. So, and then we mentioned Peroni as well, Alex Peroni, and of course the other Aussie who's really good. Well, a couple of good Aussies coming along, but Oscar Piastri is another one. And I rate Logan Sargent too, the American. Speaking of Americans. Anyway, enough of all that. They're all good, aren't they? It's an amazing thing. And then you've got Euro Formula Open, which is really good as well. So let's go back here. I have to keep going back to the live chat thing and then refreshing it that way just to get this thing to... So that was that one. Richard Anderson says, hi, Peter, which driver, and we're over an hour now, so I'm going to stop in a second. Which driver would you feel most comfortable going down the pub with? Do you mean today or of any era? Well, I mean, it would either be, in my case, I've been really good, still am very good friends with Carlos Reutemann and Nigel Mansell. So it would be one of those two. Carlos is brilliant. He WhatsApps all the time. His WhatsApp photograph, by the way, is a Lewis Hamilton spec dog. Very impressive. I'm not sure because of the Lewis thing or not, but anyway, that's Carlos's, and Carlos is in good form, so it would be Carlos really, and we would talk about engine numbers and revs and gear ratios and bell helmets and Bill Simpson and all the good things in life. And Nigel, we talk about golf really. What else is there to talk about when you're not talking about motor racing? Because Nigel's such a great golfer. Okay, that was that one. Emmanuel Bosi. If there was one era of the history of Grand Prix motor racing you would like to witness and be a part of, which would it be and why? The 60s, without any doubt at all. I was too young to be a part of the 60s, but I love the 1.5 litre Formula One cars, Lotus 33, Ferrari, BRM, Brabham. I thought they were all gorgeous, perfectly proportioned. Everything was right. The size of the tires versus the bodywork. There were no wings, treaded tires. The cars slid a lot, had suspension. And they were just beautiful racing cars. I'm sorry, they were just beautiful works of art. And I thought the 60s were just, that was my era really, in terms of falling in love with motor racing. And I guess a lot of us, have those moments, don't we? And that's it. Anyway, I think that's enough, isn't it? It's 7:05. I could go on for hours, but it wouldn't be fair on everybody else. And it's been brilliant sharing this time with you. We'll do the same thing next Thursday. We moved it to 6, as you probably noted, from 5 o'clock. So we'll try and stick to this. Unless there's some changes, we'll come up and let you know. But I thought we'd finish with the third video. And this is of a certain Ferrari driver. You may not have seen this footage because it had very, very few views on YouTube so far. A certain Ferrari driver, when the streets of Paris opened for him to celebrate his brilliance and the car's success, and basically the whole of Paris just said, wow, this is amazing. So see you next week, and thanks for your questions. Enjoy.